Greetings, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining us on yet again this episode of the Development Context of Sovereign Credit Ratings, a podcast by UNDP and AfriCatalyst. And as always, every month we have a different guest and a different topic, but all touching on sovereign credit ratings in Africa and putting them into perspective with development priorities. Now, today, we're looking at digitization, and at such a critical moment in its financial evolution. Around the world, digitization is reshaping how credit research is conducted, and this includes how risks are understood, how sovereigns are assessed, advances in data, analytics, and digital infrastructure are all transforming the entire credit research landscape, making it faster, more transparent, and more globally interconnected. Building on this, of course, we had to pull out a few things to support this topic. The 2024 IMF Working Paper provides a policy framework, not just acknowledging the potential of digitization, but offering concrete guidance on how countries might leverage digitization of diversify economies, strengthen regulatory environments, and build more resilient data-driven economies. In this episode, I'm joined by my guest today, and we want to explore how AI and machine learning and other forms of technology could reshape Africa's sovereign credit ratings and unlock deeper, more liquid capital markets. Anne Rutledge joins us today. She's a global expert in credit ratings, but also a member of the Concilium of Advisors for the Africa Credit Ratings Initiative. And thanks a lot for making time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It's my pleasure and honor.
Yeah, and I've seen you at a lot of workshops we've held in the past couple of months, and you've made a great case of the need to understand technology at this critical moment. And we would love for you to really build on what you've seen, some of the trends you've observed, especially now and in your current work, working as an analyst, as an expert when it comes to technology, just to set for us the stage before we get into this discussion.
Thank you for that question. I think that today is always shaped by yesterday. And I was mentioning to you that a copy of Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite was on my bookshelves growing up. And this continues today. So in the credit rating world, a decision was made about 50 years ago to treat credit ratings as opinions. But an opinion is a human artifact. It's not a digitization. And I think that the reasons for doing that, for calling it an opinion, have gone away. And the reasons for looking at digital treatment have never been more important. I think today, if anybody wants to understand how ratings work, and this particularly applies in Africa, then one has to be prepared to think digitally. So you mentioned the intersection. Maybe I'll just say, I think there are several key reasons related to the intersection of AI, machine learning, everything that's going on. I think that one reason the intersection is creating certain markets cannot work without modeling.
Yeah, as you were talking about digitization, obviously for us it gives us a bigger context. We're thinking of fintech, we're thinking of M-Pesa, we're thinking of all these innovations. Let's look at it from transforming finance. I am just curious to hear your thoughts on how you see now AI, machine learning, and how this is really shaping the way we assess credit.
It is shaping the way we assess credits. And one of the, I would say, you mentioned fintech, you mentioned M-Pesa, you mentioned all the different ways that Africa is using digital techniques to develop its own financial layers. And these are getting recognition in ratings, by the way. But I think that the opportunity in digitization is that it brings everything like this together into finance. And in some way, ratings needs to catch up with the trends of digitization.
When you say they need to catch up, is it in terms of how they assess or how they collect their data from the countries?
Right. So it is actually all of the above. And moreover, I would say that they need to catch up in terms of understanding. We can cut to the chase, but for example, you mentioned M-Pesa.
Yeah.
M-Pesa is money, but credit is about future money. What is it worth today? So it's about money too. Well, M-Pesa accelerates the turnaround time for money transactions. That reduces the risk, increases the certainty. That has a credit aspect. Fintech accelerates clearing and settlement. That has a credit impact, right? So all of these additional, fintech layers can potentially make the market safer. But are those improvements being reflected in the rating analysis? I'm not so sure.
That's a very good point. How would you say governments can actually leverage on some of these innovations?
Sure. So I think it's multifaceted. So if you can bear with me, I can name a couple of ways that I think. And the first way is to actually incorporate the financial system's improvements and extensions that are happening de facto into the narrative. That happens when on the African side, take, for example, I just came out of the Kenya workshop where an initiative to bring agencies together and collect data and craft narratives was formalized. In that kind of setting, you bring in the conversations around how much faster receivables are turning. You're looking at the settlement risk in the financial system. These are elements that are implicit in the sovereign rating ideas, but may not actually be data fields in the sovereign rating method per se. Do you know what I mean? They could be fields. They could be in the sovereign model, but maybe they're not. And maybe they're not intentionally, but maybe they're not because the Western environment is not advancing as quickly. For example, when I worked for Moody's in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's payment system was automated. And so clearing and settlement happened within 24 hours. This was at a time when U.S. banks took 3 or 4 days. A lot of fintech is about accelerating transactions that are certain but could be done faster.
So just trying to understand it, Anne, and I'm going to ask as somebody who is trying to understand the topic as well. If we have, for example, payments or really digitize our systems, even within the government, we will have improved data, which ultimately does that ultimately mean that it improves our ratings, or still there is much more beyond the data that we might have to do?
I like the word automatic. Nothing is automatic. The systems are automatic, but the rating improvements may not be. So, Maggie, you've said it twice, and I have not actually repeated what you said because there is a perception that the data are not good enough. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm not saying it's false, but I'm also not saying it's true. What is also possible is that the data are enough, but the narrative is missing because the context is a little bit different.
Which brings me to my next question. But we've seen a lot of people talk about experts in regards to the fear that AI might actually replace analysts. But you have also pointed out in our other conversations that, in Africa, AI could actually improve the quality of richness of research, what you have called outward bound research, with Africa researching itself. Could you just walk us through how that works and kinds of opportunities that it may open up?
Absolutely. I love that question. So let me unpack it as simply as I can. I think there are 3 questions that the answer hangs on. Who has the data? Who has the brain power to make sense of the data? And who has the money to invest in those 2 things, in making research? So with AI, the first one is obviously in Africa's favor. For African research, Africa has data that we don't have except by permission. Point number 1. Now the brain power and the money, because I have run a ratings business myself and research, and training is expensive. It's expensive to train. There's an opportunity cost. Not everybody is good at it. So you don't always invest in good people. And then once you make them good, they become expensive. So what I want to say here is that AI is leveling the playing field in Africa's favor because you can now decide if you have a senior person, from the African side, a senior person deciding what research needs to be produced and deciding, okay, which part can be automated, which part needs a brain. Now suddenly you're breaking it down, you're restructuring it, and the financial impact will be more favorable. And fundamentally, it's still Africa that has the data, not the West. Do you see what I'm saying? So it levels the playing field and it creates a great opportunity, I think, for the rise of credit research. And I'm seeing good credit research coming from Sovereign Africa and Metropole and other people. There is really good research. So yeah.
That's really interesting. And I like the last part where you say we're seeing really good research as a result of AI. And has this in any way changed or influenced ratings for certain countries? Obviously, South Africa could be our case study. You just give us a little bit of the trends, what you're really seeing.
Okay, what I'm really seeing is I don't know how much of it is AI because good research is good research, right? That's the point.
Yeah.
A bionic and a robotic combination is always the best for this. So I don't know how much it is, but I know there's real brain power going on. And another thing is how much is it impacting whose ratings? Because what I'm seeing on the research side is more a self-strengthening, increasing demand and the syndication of research coming out of Africa. Is it changing the big three? I don't know. But I think the future is good for that.
I agree. And it brings me to think really that right now as an analyst, if you needed to go online, and maybe it's something we can even tell the audience, and you say, okay, give me context on, let's say, country Ghana. This is what I need, and etc. AI would literally break it down for you. But again, it's the question of now, how do countries update this and churn out that kind of data so that it's updated, that even if we are moving with the times of digitization, there's also data that is already out there that can be captured and kept online. And it's not like a wave or a phase that we actually get to miss, because AI doesn't capture something that doesn't, exist. It also captures what exists and feeds into its systems. I would think that's actually how it works. So it needs also a little bit of working for countries to shape the narrative, like you've said earlier. And so it's not just the point of data, but it's also the narrative that ultimately becomes the data.
Yes, I agree with you. I can see that you are a bit stricter than I am. But I'm not saying that Africa should rest on its laurels, but I think that also what you're saying and what I'm saying is that this is building a culture.
Absolutely.
And I think that all kinds of building, of course, requires focus and discipline, but it also requires rewards. And so I think what I'm trying to do is nurture the sense that there are the rewards out there at the end. That this is not fighting a difficult battle where you're, where you're coming up against established rating agencies that know everything and have always known everything and do everything the right way. That just simply isn't true. The present is always a challenge for everybody, and the established players try to cling to the past. And those who have, the youth, Africa is a continent with many young people, and the education, because there's a lot of good education in Africa now, and I think in the West, many places are past their peak. I think that it's important to paint a picture of how good it could be, because I really believe it can be.
You made a very important distinction when you spoke earlier between AI and machine learning, and you're very clear that we shouldn't mix the two. Now, machine learning is often framed in terms of writing predictions, but it can also be thought of in terms of rules and automation. Of course, one area this is creating big opportunities in Africa is speeding up credit ratings and potentially making, bond markets more liquid. Could you help us unpack how that works?
Yes, absolutely. One of the rule writing and, updating ratings in terms of the rules, I think is what I'm especially focused on in the intersection between machine learning and ratings. And here's why. Because if you wait a year before you revisit a prediction, a lot is going to change. But if you wait a day, not much has changed.
Yeah.
And the opportunity for updating in the ratings world is completely missing. I'm sorry, but I came to ratings from exchanges where every day you get an update. Every hour, every minute, you get an update. Now, credit doesn't change that fast, but credit does change. And you're actually creating risk by not updating. So I'd like to turn the conversation around and say digitization in the form of machine learning is creating an unrivaled opportunity for African countries to use ratings in a more modern way that lowers risk, increases certainty, and of course the reward for certainty is a lower cost of capital. I think it's a complete, home run from the African perspective. That is why I'm so big on machine learning.
I like that distinction, and it brings me to my next question, where we've seen a wave of major infrastructure projects coming across Africa that obviously require significant private capital. Now, how can digital rating systems support these developments, and why might now be the right time for African countries to adopt them?
What a great question. Let me answer it both in the context of AI and machine learning. Very quickly, AI has the opportunity to solidify and increase good research. And obviously, people want to know, as the infrastructure is rolling out, how it's going, what it's doing, how it's changing trade.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that's
absolutely.
Second point, though, is that I'm in a lot of conversations at the moment. Let me just put it that way, without naming names. And I am aware, one of the public pieces that everybody knows about is the $10 billion airport project that the African Development Bank is working on in Addis. But there are multi-billion-dollar projects, bond projects funded by bonds that are being talked about. And quite frankly, I don't think that, one party that I'm talking to doesn't know about another party's projects. Well, if you add them all together, this is a very big amount of debt. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's inevitable because Africa is developing its infrastructure. But what needs to happen is this continuous monitoring that I was talking about. One of the home run applications of machine learning is the opportunity to watch the infrastructure come into place and to reflect the impact on risk and uncertainty, and to create the incentives so that if people see that it's getting better, then the amount of debt outstanding goes down, but also the amount of risk in the future goes down. If you're not monitoring that, then you don't really know where you stand, and investors will demand money for uncertainty. So I see one of the best ways to kind of domesticate, if you will, or to bring all of these projects into a total picture is to do the ratings in a machine learning environment where at each point in time you can see that the project is rolling out as planned, and once it becomes cash flow positive, that the cash flows are coming in.
It also brings in the perspective of accountability and transparency that we've seen a lot of investors or people really would require, especially from a lot of our governments, if we're being transparent. But I know that we are left with very little time. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask this one question. If there was one lesson about digitization and credit ratings that you could leave for African policymakers and analysts, let's assume they're listening to our podcast now, what would it be?
Another great question. So very simply, digitization is a way to systematically lower the cost of capital for your projects, to raise or pierce the sovereign ceiling. Why? Because most of the financing that is going to transform Africa's landscape is going to be off balance sheet. It's going to be private or public-private. It's going to be off balance sheet, and the investors are going to hold the governments accountable for the risk unless you have a systematic machine that is observing and measuring and monitoring and reporting on a periodic basis. And all you have to do for that to tell a good story instead of a bad story is just to do what you said you were going to do. Just to follow your promise. Just follow the credit the way you said it. And when that happens, if you do it properly, number one, you're not going to pay as much going in because people know that the accountability is there, the transparency is there. And second, as the project builds and as the cash flows begin to come in and the project is paid off, the risk is actually going to go down, and your risk capital can be reduced by 1/3. And on a 10 or 20 or $50 billion infrastructure product portfolio, that is an enormous amount of capital savings. If you don't do that, you're going to have a global financial crisis on your hands, just like before. And that's a promise.
We will not have that, Anne. But thank you so much. I think one of the key things for me to note is that data is important, it's key, but we have tools with us that can actually help us improve this data, make it available, but also make the process more inclusive, more open, and also available for the investors, for the analysts, for everybody. And I like that we've learned about machine learning, rather AI as well. We've learned about different aspects and why this is important for sovereigns, why this is also important for analysts, and it's also been a pleasure for me to really watch you explain this to some of our during some of our workshops and events, and it's a privilege to have had you on this program. Thank you so much.
Privilege and the pleasure are all mine, Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and to all our listeners, thanks a lot. This is the Development Context of Sovereign Credit Ratings, a podcast by UNDP and Africa Catalyst.